Now, we also have with us Steve Ciobo. He is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer and has been at this address here at the National Press Club, where we're broadcasting from this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. These figures are disturbing. $47 billion deficit now for this year and a total of $123 billion in deficits over the coming 4 years. How much responsibility, if any, does this government take?
Well, David, the reality is that what the Treasurer has done today is outline for all Australians what is Labor's legacy. We think it's important that we have a starting point, that people understand what is the true state of the books, and that's what today was about. Now, I know Labor has claimed, well, hang on, they've pumped $8.8 billion in terms of a grant to the Reserve Bank and made claims like that. But the reality is that Australians get that this is a consequence of 6 years of Labor government. This is the task that we now have to face and that we've got to deal with, and that's what we'll be doing over the coming months and years.
What exactly the deterioration since the pre-election figures is $68 billion. That's the worsening outlook.
Yep.
What of that $68 billion is Labor's fault?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of the economy being weaker than we anticipated it being. It's a combination of... No, I'm saying it's a combination of things. It's a combination of the economy being weaker than we anticipated it being, but it's also a combination of, frankly, what was some, overly optimistic forecast by Labor, and the Treasurer in his speech went to great lengths, and it's the most obvious and I think glaring example of the way in which Labor manipulated some figures with, for example, the unemployment rate. I mean, we saw that Labor says, oh, it'll be 6.25, and then magically overnight it suddenly becomes 5% for the last 2 years in the forward estimates. What we're doing is making sure that we've got consistency, and you see in the MyEFO papers that we've provided a consensus range there, taken effectively the midpoint, and so we're being truthful, and as we say, this is the first truthful state of the books from Labor that the Australian people have seen.
But for this financial year, the deficit's gone from $30 billion prior to the election, 47 now.
Sure.
So what's Labor done to make this year's figure worse?
Well, the question is, why has the deficit gotten worse? And the answer to that is because of several things. We've got a $13.7 billion increase in terms of decisions made by the government, by the coalition, that have had an impact. Now, $8.8 billion of that is us providing a grant to the Reserve Bank.
But is Labor to blame for any of this increase?
Well, I mean, of course they are, David. The reality is, I don't like the word blame, okay. and trust me, I get that Australians don't want to hear about the blame game. But the reality is that the reason why we've put that grant to the Reserve Bank, for example, is because Labor drew down dividends out of the Reserve Bank.
I appreciate the argument. I'm just wondering if Labor is to blame at all for any of that deterioration this year.
Well, yes, because what we're continuing to see is that the forecast that Labor put into their budgets year after year after year were overly optimistic, were not predicated on genuine results that were likely to actually be what the market was expecting. And so we're continuing to see a write-down in revenues, continuing to see increased expenditure over what the forecasts were.
Didn't those forecasts come from Treasury, the same people you're using for the forecasts?
Yeah, but the key difference is this, David, and again, I'll hark back to that unemployment number, because I think that's, as I said, the most obvious example where you can talk about the way in which Treasury has offered up a range of numbers, which I think yourself and other journalists asked questions of the Treasurer on, and then the Treasurer of the day said, okay, well, we think it should be this.
So that's what's happened here. That's what's happened here.
And we are trying to avoid that by saying we are giving a consensus range, and we're showing, with what the consensus opinion is, and picking the midpoint. So we know, of course, the longer out you project, the more variation there is. But what we're attempting to do is be transparent and open so that all Australians and all economists know what this government is doing with respect to our forecasts.
And will that be the modus operandi from now on under this government? You'll pick that centre point in the range of forecasts. You can guarantee us that you won't go for something higher or lower.
People will always be able to see why we've picked what we've picked and where that might sit with market opinion and consensus overall. So people will always know what this government's actually about and why our forecasts, we think, are a more accurate snapshot of where the economy actually is.
A couple of decisions taken in this budget update to pay for the $1.2 billion extra for the school funding reforms. You've taken $1 billion out of the trades training centres. What do you say to students who might have been looking forward to those?
Well, I say to all the students in Queensland, my home state, that we are pleased to be able to deliver on the extra funding that we indicated that we'd provide them. The reality is that, and this was the kind of tomfoolery that Bill Shorten got up to, to when he was Education Minister, where Labor said, OK, well, we're going to take $1.2 billion as savings. I mean, as if the Labor Party would walk away from everyone in Queensland, the Northern Territory and Western Australia. That money always needed to be found.
Sure, but why have you decided to take it from trades training centres when arguably manufacturing is hurting? Holden, Qantas. We need to put some investment into skills.
You know, David, the hardest decision that any government's got to make is the way in which we allocate finite resources and finite capital.
So you're spending it on paid parental leave instead?
Well, the reality is that there are going to be a whole raft of decisions that government will need to make over coming years about where we think we're going to get maximum bang for the buck for taxpayers, but also to deliver the kind of social dividends that Australians expect us to deliver on. And I guess in 3 years' time, we'll see whether or not they agreed with the majority of our calls or not.
Are you happy still to go ahead with this paid parental leave scheme, given the scale of the deficits and debt we're looking at now?
Well, the paid parental leave scheme is funded. I mean, we made it clear prior to the election that we'd be putting in place the levy and some offsets. So that's funded. And importantly, the Prime Minister's view very strongly on this. Well, the Prime Minister's view very strongly on this is that this is an important productivity measure. Now, we know crucial to getting. We know that crucial, absolutely, and we know that crucial to getting economic growth in this country is to make sure that we've got a more productive economy. That's through quality spend like infrastructure investment, and that's what we're focused on doing.
Just finally and briefly, all options on the table, the Treasurer said. We're going to have to leave it there.